1982 was a massive year in music. It was the year of mega chart singles like Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, Physical by Olivia Newton-John, and I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, all that spent many weeks at number one. There's also big albums like Man Who Works Business as Usual, Prince 1999, Duran, Rio, and Michael Jackson Thriller came out at the end of the year. In the middle of it all, an artist who broke out of the second British invasion with hit songs that were labeled as post-punk and new wave, recorded a conceptual tour de force that contained a genre-bending song that still resonates today, Takes You Away. We break down that song next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. Tell you what, I'm feeling a lot better today. Make sure that you subscribe below to be a part of this community of music appreciation. If you have a sec, check out our Patreon page to be an insider. Now, we return to our show, number one in our hearts, where we, of course, discuss a song that was so great, it should have been a number one hit on the Billboard Hot 100. For some reason, it came up short. In the case of this next song, though, it came really close. It was truly a revelation at that time because its mysterious arrangement and its lyrical resonance stood out in contrast to all of the other songs in the charts at that time. Joe Jackson grew up in the working class community of Paulsgrove, an area of Portsmouth, England. He was diagnosed with asthma when he was just 3, a condition that he struggled with well into his 20s. His asthmatic condition made sports too difficult for young Joe, so he became a voracious reader, and he then turned to music. As an adolescent, Joe developed a passion for 1930s and 1940s swing and classical music. He learned to play the violin at 11. When he was an early teen, his parents scraped enough money to buy him a used piano. Joe took lessons and quickly became a very proficient player, so much so that he began playing pubs when he was just 16 years old. Joe's first band was called Edward Bear, not to be confused with the Canadian band of the same name who had a number 3 pop hit on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in 72 with a tune titled Last Song. In 78, Joe Jackson was signed by A&M Records and promptly formed the Joe Jackson Band that performed as a unit on Joe's debut album, Look Sharp, that was released in 79. Phenomenal album. The first single from Look Sharp was Is She Really Going Out With Him?, featuring a clever back-and-forth narrative with Joe singing in a conversational style. Is she really going out with him? Framing a humorous storyline with lyrics like, here comes Jeannie with her new boyfriend. They say that looks don't count for much. If so, there's your proof.
They say the looks don't count for much, so there goes your proof.
Is She Really Going Out With Him? Such a hilarious song. It was initially released in 1978, but it flopped. A&M reissued the single in 79 to latch on to the emerging popularity of the new wave movement, and the second run became Joe's international breakthrough. The second coming Is She Really Going Out With Him? Climbed to number 13 in the UK, went to number 9 in Canada, and went to number 21 here in the States on the Billboard Hot 100. Look Sharp was followed by the LP I'm the Man, which included his highest charting hit in the UK with the single It's Different for Girls that reached number 5 in England. But the cut didn't bust the Hot 100 here in the States. In 1980, Joe's third studio album, Beat Crazy, was released. It was the last album to be credited as the Joe Jackson Band. For Beat Crazy, Joe tried to mix things up and break away from what he perceived as the format of the first 2 albums. The record was a departure from the earlier albums with reggae and ska stylings that didn't catch on with the record-buying public or with radio. Joe felt that Beat Crazy was unsuccessful because the band lacked clear focus during the recording sessions. Joe stated that Beat Crazy represented a desperate attempt to make some sense of rock and roll. Deep in our hearts, as he would say, we knew it was doomed to failure. It was the first time over 3 albums where none of the singles became a hit in the US or the UK. By 1981, it was clear that Joe Jackson needed an interval, and he found respite with his 4th release, Jumpin' Jive. Great album. A record that allowed Joe to just have a lot of fun. reinterpreting classic swing and jump blues ditties originally done by some of his heroes from the 40s, including new versions of songs by Cab Calloway, Louis Jordan, and Skeets Tolbert.
Come on, boys, let's have a ball.
After the jump and jive frolic, Joe needed to concentrate on composing a record that would put him on a career course that was artistically satisfying, a path that would bust him out of the post-punk new wave corner that the music industry had painted him into. Joe loathed category and being constantly compared to other artists that were lumped into the second UK invasion like Elvis Costello and Graham Parker. Actually, Elvis Costello also cringed with the typical labeling by music pundits. In '82, Joe was truly at a crossroads professionally and personally. He went through a bitter divorce and he decided to leave England. He fleeing to New York City in search of musical enlightenment and a rejuvenated spirit. Joe sublet a flat in the East Village, and he loved hanging out at the city's Latin and jazz clubs. Jackson was enthralled by New York City, who isn't? And his exuberance ruminated the idea of a concept album that would capture the nonstop energy of the city that never sleeps. He visualized making a two-sided record with the songs running together, creating a 24-hour experience, if you will, that epitomized the New York City vibe. Joe came up with Night and Day as the name of the new LP, borrowing a title from a Cole Porter song. Side 1 would represent night, and side 2 would represent day. On every corner of the Big Apple, Joe inhaled inspiration and fell into what he called a hot love affair with the city. The wide-eyed excitement Joe felt going out on the town was poured into the track Steppin Out, the lead single from his future masterpiece, Night and Day. With Steppin Out, an expression originating from the Manhattan party scene of the 30s, Joe wanted to conjure up the gleam of the neon lights and the feel of cabbing from club to club, taking in the city's thrilling vitality, like a couple all dressed up and going to CBGB or the Village Gate even. He also imagined what he called a romantic ballad set to a disco beat. It would be a record with virtually no guitars, unlike songs from his previous work. In his mind's eye, Steppin Out would ultimately be a soundtrack of expressing the cultural euphoria of the 40s with a modern twist. With Steppin Out and its supporting album, Joe Jackson was in lockstep with the ghosts of Cole Porter and George Gershwin. First of all, he played nearly every instrument on the recording of Steppin Out. This included Joe playing a Fender Rhodes piano, acoustic grand piano, a Yamaha CP80, a keyboard, a Hammond organ, gem organ, synthesizers, even the alto sax. The only exception to that was Larry Tolfree, who played a real snare drum that was overdubbed on top of a fake snare. The rest of the drum section on Steppin Out was played on a Korg KR55 drum machine. Jackson, I guess, was a big fan of the band Kraftwerk, particularly the electronic dance beats and bass riffs found on their Computer World album. That was the sound that he was seeking for. Steppin Out, he wanted an infectious, electrifying melody. To achieve the groove he was looking for, Joe and co-producer David Kirschenbaum layered the drum machine with a Prophet 5 synthesizer that served as the song's bass line, pervading a precise and metronomic sound throughout the track's arrangement. Jackson also used a Boss DR55 drum machine to get that continuous beat that we hear. All Joe had to do was press the button marked club beat. One of the production elements that makes Steppin Out such a riveting, intoxicating track is the tinkling, bell-like effect elicited by a classical instrument known as a glockenspiel. A little history here. The roots of the glockenspiel go clear back to the 1700s with George Friedrich Handel, who is believed to be the first to incorporate the instrument into a musical arrangement. Handel used it in his Oratorio Sol in 1739. The glockenspiel was also utilized to represent Papageno's magic bells in Mozart's two-act opera, The Magic Flute, in 1791. The glockenspiel certainly provided that magic touch in the recording of Steppin' Out. It's just amazing. I mean, the idea to include a glockenspiel was a stroke of genius by Joe Jackson. The synthesized bass line and jazzy block chords accented with the chime of the metal bars on a glockenspiel was just a delicious recipe that created Steppin' Out's wispy, mesmerizing consonants.
Look and dry your eyes.
Joe Jackson is a very underrated vocalist in my opinion. He has a unique, unaffected resonance with a torchy sincerity. And it's perfected on Steppin' Out, as Joe has us just hanging on to his every vocal nuance, his every word.
No more angry words to say can come alive.
David Kirschenbaum used a British Calric mic to record Joe's vocal on Steppin' Out. That specific microphone captured just a pure, authentic Joe Jackson vocal performance, ensuring against over-processing or slickness that have hurt some recordings from that time. Apparently, Joe has always found it challenging to write lyrics for his songs. However, the lyrics on Steppin' Out were intuitive and had nothing to do with, Joe's personal introspection. According to Joe, the lyrics just felt right. That's a quote. I want to talk about the lyrics from Steppin' Out for a second. The first line from the song has always knocked me out poetically.
The mist across the window hides the light.
The mist across the window hides the lines, but nothing hides the color of the lights that shine. Electricity so fine, look and dry your eyes. Another of the passages in it that I find incredibly insightful is verse 3. We are young, but getting old before our time. We'll leave the TV and the radio behind. Don't you wonder what we'll find stepping out tonight.
We'll leave the TV and the radio behind.
True words of wisdom from Mr. Joe Jackson. I mean, how liberating it was back in the day to leave the TV and the radio behind, get out into the world and experience or discover something new. In this case, the beautiful city of New York. Of course, today that would be the equivalent to leaving our cell phone or our laptop at home. Unthinkable, right? How would we ever have the self-control to do that? And yet we used to do it all the time. We need to do that more than ever right now, in my opinion. Get away from all the clutter in our lives and just dwell in the wonderment of the moment, the magic of exploration and imagination. This song is the synthesis of that. I mean, exploration and imagination. The first time I heard the haunting melody of this song, I was whisked away from my Idaho small town, and I was delivered to another dimension entirely.
And in a yellow taxi turned to me.
We, so tired of all the darkness in our lives, with no more angry words to say, can come alive, get into a car and drive to the other side. Me, babe, stepping out into the night, into the light. I mean, it was such a relief of the senses, an alternative to the worry and the anxiety of the scary world outside that I grew up in. As a child, to hear Joe Jackson sing about driving to the other side, into the night, into the light, it was an escape to a world elegantly painted by the crispness of Jackson's magical voice, his wondrous imagery. It's an escape I can still turn to today. Night and Day is indeed a brilliant album where each of the songs segue together with no track pause in the grooves of the vinyl. It was a conceptual art that has been lost in the age of digital downloads. Steppin' Out closes out side one, the night portion of Night and Day, preceded brilliantly by the lively salsa-flavored track Target that fuses entrancingly into Steppin' Out's snappy beat pattern. Joe Jackson is a crusader for artistic purity, no doubt about it. On the flip side, he finds the superficiality of the music business abhorrent. Although he had fun with the sarcasm and parody of his early videos, by the 80s, Joe had an aversion to doing music videos. Joe believed in 1983 that MTV was beginning to have a negative effect on music. After filming what he called a crappy video for the beautiful ballad from Night and Day, another one you should check out, Breaking Us in Two,
Always something breaking us.
Joe refused to make music videos, even though he knew it would damage his career. But Joe Jackson, very much a man of principle, and he will not compromise his integrity. It's one of the traits that has made his music so convincing and restorative. Jackson's unmitigated artistry was recognized by tastemakers and critics when Steppin Out was nominated for Record of the Year and Best Pop Vocal Performance Male at the Grammy Awards in '83. His superb musicianship was further recognized when Joe won a Grammy in 2001 for Best Pop Instrumental Album for his progressive rock, classical music hybrid, Symphony 1, that was released in 1999. I gotta tell you, Steppin Out truly dazzled listeners around the world. I mean, it moved to number 5 in Canada. It was Joe Jackson's second biggest hit in England. It rose to number 6. It was number 4 on the adult contemporary chart, 7 at mainstream rock, a big song that went all over the charts, and it soared to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100, crossed over all over. It made Joe's biggest hit in America, which is no small feat. In my opinion, though, it should have been a number 1 hit. It actually peaked at number 6 for almost a month. The songs at number 1 during its peak were Mickey by Tony Basil for 1 week and Daryl Hall and John Oates with Maneater for several weeks. Maneater was actually at number 1 for 4 weeks. So in my alternate reality, the most successful duo of all time trade spots with Joe Jackson for just 1 week. But in the reality we all live in right now, Steppin Out is number 1 in our hearts. Decades later, it still evokes cinematic exhilaration with its luxuriously layered melody and its lyrical escapism. Without fail, it transports me to a magical dimension of sound and vision. It'll do the same for you, I promise. Hear it in our playlist below, rediscover it. Leave us a comment about this masterpiece of the 1980s, about Joe Jackson. What are songs that transport you? What other songs should we cover on this show? Tell us below. To get the album Night and Day, the masterpiece, click on the Amazon links below. If you dig this content, we do invite you to subscribe below. Look us up on Patreon to be an active part of keeping the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. Stay safe.